Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry we were late. We've had technical difficulties. It happens sometimes. But thank you all for joining. Super excited to have our panelists talk about what's going on in education this year, what passed during session, what their priorities are moving forward. And you will notice you can probably only see Representative Aloupis and I. We also have Bethany McAlister on with us. We're having some issues with her video, but she's also part of the panel. And then we're supposed to have Senator Jones as part of our panel. And some of you, if you live in Florida, you may have seen there's an apartment complex in Miami that was just deemed structurally unsound. And so that is in his district, and they are having to evacuate all the residents of that apartment complex. And so unfortunately, he is there, all of his staff is there, and they were not able to join us. But we'll definitely have him back on another webinar in the future because he's awesome and has a lot of great things to say about what's going on in Florida. So to introduce myself, my name is Sara Clements. I'm a vice president for McGuire Woods Consulting based in our Tallahassee, Florida office. And my quick background is I was a ELA and reading teacher, middle school and high school in Florida. I started in Orange County Public Schools in Orlando and taught for a year in Tallahassee before I started working in the education policy and advocacy world. And I've been with McGuire Woods since 2018. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, but real quick, we're going to have a time for Q&A at the end. We should have plenty of time. You should be able to type in a question if you have any questions you want to ask the panelists. Go ahead and type those in at any time, and then we will pick those up when we get to the Q&A portion. But go ahead and write those down so you don't forget. With that, I'm going to let Representative Aloupis do a quick introduction.
Thank you, Sarah. The technical issues were fun. We got it working. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Vance Aloupis. I am the state representative for House District 115, which is down in southern Miami-Dade County. Some of my municipalities are Doral, Westchester, South Miami, Pinecrest, Palmetto Bay, the Kendall area. So if you know Miami-Dade, that's where I live. My background, my path to the legislature, I've known Sarah for a long time. I think we probably have known each other now for certainly prior to my entrance into the legislature, but have worked in education policy for about 12 years, really focused on early childhood education. So children 0 to 5, Florida's PreK program, Florida's school readiness program, and ran for office a number of years ago, primarily because I used to spend a lot of time in and around Tallahassee doing work from a policy standpoint, and just felt like there was so much more that we had to be doing, that we could be doing. So felt like if I could just get into the chamber, maybe we could make those things move a little bit more quickly. And that has been really my focus for the last 4 years. And I serve as the chair of the Early Learning and Elementary Education Subcommittee, which is a perfect spot for me.
Thank you. Did you say what your official non-legislative title is?
Yeah. So we have a, as those of you probably know, we have a part-time legislature. So all of us have real jobs. So my real job is I'm the CEO of an organization called the Children's Movement of Florida, which is a statewide organization focused on increasing visibility and awareness around early childhood investment.
Awesome. Bethany, I'm so sorry we can't see you. Can you give us a quick intro?
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bethany Swonson. I'm the real issue with the technical difficulties. Sorry, I'm camera issues. Happy to be here, though. I have the great honor of serving as Chief of Staff of the Department of Education for the state of Florida, meaning which I get to work with the great individuals that work in this department, that we help the state education system all the way from our earliest learners and early learning through K-12, and then into our post-secondary, everything from our college system to vocational rehab, blind services, and supporting all of our adult learners with any of those workforce needs so that they can hopefully flourish into a thriving, not only professional life, but also a personal life. We like to really focus on the whole student and making sure that we're building good citizens as well as great educated individuals. My path here is not very traditional, similar to Representative Aloupis. I had knew Sara and Representative Aloupis before I came to the department through a nonprofit that I worked at, where I learned and was very much in awe of understanding how much education can impact and fix so many of the issues that the state of Florida faces, and had the opportunity to come to the department. And after a series of jobs, I am now in this position at the department. So I think it's the most important topic for all of us to focus on in education in the state. And so I'm excited all of you have decided to join this afternoon to talk about where we are after the 2022 legislative session.
Thank you. So the first question is for both of you. I'm going to let Bethany go first. But the question is just simply, what were your priorities on education going into 2022 session? And what were the results of those? So Bethany, you can just talk about the department. What were y'all's biggest priorities this year?
Well, I'm going to actually take everybody in a little bit of a history trip with me before I talk about this year, because in 2019, when this governor came in and the Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Corcoran, came in, we were tasked with an executive order to get rid of Common Core standards in the classroom, which resulted in multi-year work from the department where we totally rebuild all of our math and English language arts standards from K through 12th grade with the help of hundreds of Florida educators, experts in the field, a lot of months of meetings, and we did tours across the state to review those standards. And those were adopted last year by the State Board of Education, resulting now where we are today is we have new textbooks that are going to be hitting the classroom in 22-23, but we knew we were going to need to have a new assessment that were aligned with the new standards. And that meant the end of the FSA in Florida, whether that meant a new version of what we have historically done in the last several years. Before that was the FCAT. And one of the things that we came around the table and we went around the state, we heard a lot from different Florida educators and experts regarding the benefits that locally a lot of the districts were getting just from using progress monitoring and understanding where the students were at. That really helped us get to a point for our main priority this legislative session was to really think outside the box for this opportunity for us to come forward with a new accountability system, but build upon the great accountability system that the state currently has. So our main priority was Senate Bill 1048, the student assessment by Senator Diaz this year. And it really helped get Florida, honestly, the first in the nation that's going to adopt a statewide progress monitoring system for accountability purposes. And it's going to be aligned to the benchmarks of excellence of student thinking. Those are the title, the best, as we call them, ELA and math standards that were adopted about last year. And we're going to eliminate Common Core officially from the classroom, from both the standards, the textbooks, as well as our assessments now. And it's going to have the end of high stakes testing and replace it with progress monitoring 3 times throughout a year. So in the beginning of the school year, all students and educators and parents will be able to see where students are at in the beginning. They'll have one in the middle, and then at the end of the year. What's really important, though, is progress monitoring 1 and 2, as we call it. It's not for accountability purposes. It's fully for informational purposes. And it's going to make sure that not only the parents within 2 weeks, but also the teachers within a week of those results know where our students are struggling. So we don't have to wait at the end of the school year to get them the support, that we can start getting them those supports much quicker. And I know Representative Aloupis, he didn't run the bill, but I know he followed it very closely. It went through his committee too, so I'm sure he might even have a couple comments about it overall. But that's kind of a high level, our main priority, and where we are now. The results are it passed, and it was already signed by the governor. And we have a meeting at 3 o'clock about implementation at the department. So we're working really hard to get that up and running for August when school starts this next year.
Awesome. Representative Aloupis, same question.
Yeah, so I know you want to probably talk about 1048 a little bit more just from the legislative side. I think for me, it was my second year serving as the chair of the Early Learning and Elementary Education Subcommittee. And we had just come out of what I thought was probably the most transformational year that we've seen in the Florida legislature certainly in my career, but probably in about 20 years around early childhood education. So what year are we in now? I don't even know what year we're in. It's 2022. So in 2021 session, Representative Erin Grawl and I, really under she was a lead sponsor, carried HB 419, which was really an entire reworking of the early learning system, right? So I'm going to take you all, because I have you trapped on this webinar, through a deep dive of early learning policy. Historically, the Office of Early Learning was under the Agency for Workforce Innovation, which was the old DEO. It was then moved over to the governor's office with sort of a dotted line to the Department of Education. And for those of us in the early childhood space, we always felt like early learning is a educational program. It's early childhood education. So we always felt like it never really made sense for it not to be within the department. So under Chair Grawl's bill, what that legislation did was create the Division of Early Learning within the Department of Education, name a chancellor, who is now the chancellor of the division is Matt Mears, incredible person, provided accountability for VPK, which is something that the advocates like myself have fought for years. For a long time, we never really knew if VPK was working and which programs were high quality and which were not, because the only metric that we were actually assessing was kindergarten readiness. And kindergarten readiness is fine to the extent that you want to know where children are when they come into your system, but they're not a fair reflection of the quality of the program that they just came from. So, we had to have that conversation, and we'll talk a little bit more about assessments in a bit, but assessments in early childhood are different than assessments in K-12. So you're not going to do a baby FCAT. In fact, what you really want to do is progress monitoring and looking at, not progress monitoring, observational tools, and looking at the interactions between the children and the teacher. And that's what we focused on with 419. I ran HB 7011, which was a leadership bill from the speaker, which really was sort of, I think, the foundational piece for a lot of the work we did around progress monitoring this year. It set up a progress monitoring tool through eighth grade. Obviously, we've expanded that this year. But in 2021, the focus for us on early learning was really on redefining the framework for the system in both school readiness and pre-K. Once we redefined the system, the conversation this year was around funding. And, I would say probably the two biggest issues we saw this year were a bill carried by, again, the great Representative Grawl, looking at the funding formula for school readiness. There have been major questions over the last number of years as to whether or not the appropriate number of dollars are getting into communities based upon the formula that we're currently using, because it's based on market rate. So in communities that have an incentive to depress the rate of childcare, they are disproportionately hurt by the formula because they receive less money from the state. So we really looked at it from a cost of care model. What does it actually cost to provide the quality of care that we need? So that was legislation that we ran through the House. I believe the Senate heard it in one committee, and then ultimately it was put into the conforming bill that passed at the end of session. So that was a major win for us on the funding side. Plus, we saw the largest increase in VPK funding that we've ever seen in Florida. When VPK first started in 2000, it was passed in 2002. It went into effect in 2000, I think 4 or 5 or 5 or 6. It was $2,500 per student, and you saw a gradual increase in that investment, but then the recession came and the number dropped dramatically. And really post-recession, we never got back to that $2,500 number that we had when the program first started. This year, really through the leadership of the Senate and the House, we saw a $317 per student increase in VPK, which brings VPK funding to the highest that it's ever been. Still, again, a 3-hour-a-day program, and there are areas where we can probably continue to work and fix. But from the funding standpoint, you saw, again, one, that addressing the cost of care issue, which is something that's plagued the early childhood system for a long time, and then a significant investment in VPK, which is something that we've been, for those of us on the advocate side, we've been fighting for a long time.
Awesome. I want to talk about a couple of the bills that passed this session, and one Bethany already mentioned, and that's 1048, which was one of the the biggest policies to pass this year. Bethany kind of went through it, but do either one of you want to add any more detail? Like, what does this mean for students and what does it mean for schools once this is implemented?
I'll let Bethany talk about, I mean, she's the expert in terms of implementation, so I think she'll be able to get more into the weeds. I think from us, from a legislative standpoint, there was a real consensus about addressing, and I don't like to use this term, but like the high stakes nature of testing in Florida, right? And to do so without impacting the accountability system that we have in Florida. I think, and I said this in every committee that I saw the bill 3 times, I think, in committee and then again on the floor, and I said this all 4 times. Accountability is really important in Florida's education system. Like, I think that's been one of the key drivers of the success that we've had. Now, again, is the system perfect? No. Are there areas for it to be fixed? Yes. And I think I saw earlier on one of the people in the group is Kathy Boehm, who's from FEA, and she and I've had a lot of conversations about, how is this data being used, from a school grades perspective to a teacher compensation perspective. And I think those are really important conversations. But I always begin with, accountability is a very good thing, that we need to know how well our students are doing. So you say all that, and then you say, okay, well, we've got to figure out how do we get away from this dynamic of like this once a year test that drives the teachers crazy, where the students are stressed out, the parents are stressed out. It feels like, for those of us who went to law school, like you're taking the bar exam every year. And I think, what we had to do as a legislative body is say, okay, here's where we're trying to go. We're trying to get away from the environment around the test being one that is so riddled with anxiety, to a system that allows the testing that we're doing to guide instruction, to support the teachers, to keep the parents aware of where their child is throughout the year. But also, at the end of the day, we still have to adhere to federal law. There still has to be some of assessment data, right? So you're going to have some assessment that shows that the student has, a full understanding of what they've learned over the course of the year. And, building off of HB 7011 from last year and looking at progress monitoring, that's what, Chair Placencia's bill did. Now, I know there were questions, there's a lot of narratives that get pushed in Tallahassee, some accurate, a lot not, many not. The question about, is this going to increase more testing, or is it going to decrease more testing? From the legislative standpoint, what we did was we decreased testing time. Now, I think the question moving forward is, I know a number of school districts have their own progress monitoring tool, and what is the interplay going to be with the state system overlaying onto the school district? And those are going to have to be conversations that are had at the school district level, right? That they, there may be reasons why they want to continue to use, in some respects, their progress monitoring, but it will have to be in conjunction with what we're doing at the state level. So I know from our vantage point that what we have, what we say grace over, I think we really tried to encapsulate those concerns that parents had around the high stakes testing, the needs of teachers, but also making sure that we're adhering to the federal law that we need to adhere to.
Bethany, anything to add to that? I'm sure we'll get some questions from the audience on that, but before we move on.
I think Representative Aloupis, you did a great job, and I think what is important, we did build upon his bill 7011 last year in 419, that it actually already created, whether the 1048 passed or not, that there was going to be a progress monitoring system in the state for VPK through 8th grade. What this now looks like, instead of having VPK through 8th grade and the end of the year assessment, you're combining those essentially for VPK all the way up into high school. And if you asked specifically earlier, what does this mean for students and what does this mean for schools? I think a couple of nuances of confusion about what does this look like and how you're implementing it. This is going to have PD across this summer intensely through all the districts. So we're training all of the educators, all of the schools, all of the districts on it, but it's not going to be very different from what they're already used to doing with their own locally progress monitoring systems. If a district does decide in those conversations within their schools that they don't maybe want to use another progress monitoring system and they want to use just this one, they can do that, or they can continue to use both of them. That is going to be up to their discretion, as long as they are also considering what the legislature has made sure in the conversation to be, that we are maximizing the time of instruction for our students for the benefit of them. And it's not changing any of the accountability metrics of school grades, teacher accountability. All of those things are exactly the same as they were in the past. So in 22-23, we will have a year where we get the baseline data. There essentially will not be, it's the first year where we get that information. And that summer we work with work groups and come back to the legislature. And by the 23-24 school year, that's then when you'll have officially those school grades, and we'll be able to know where we are as a state within the new systems. When it comes to a student level, this is really what Representative Aloupis said, not to be this big, scary LSAT that they're taking at the end of every grade, that this is something that we can inform them and their parents to help them know they need help in this one area and get them that help immediately instead of waiting. I mean, we use data-informed decisions every day. As adults, look down on your right or your left wrist. You probably have an Apple Watch, and you probably have 3 rings that you're looking at every day to see if you need to stand up or sit down or walk. Or maybe not Representative Aloupis. Okay, perfect, old school. But it's to make sure we are having our accountability system really be the number one in the nation and informed to make the best decisions at that personal level for that personal education that each student and parent deserves.
Well, thank you for reminding me that I have not exercised today, so my rings aren't looking too good. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit to another bill I think is important but didn't get a ton of attention, and that's some charter school legislation. There were a couple of charter school bills. One dealt more with renewals of contracts and maybe creating some efficiency with charter schools, replication and things like that. The other one was a bill by Senator Manny Diaz and Representative Alex Rizzo that would create a Florida Charter School Review Commission and also an institute. I think it's I don't remember the exact name, Florida
Institute for Innovation, the one at MDC?
Charter School for Innovation at Miami-Dade College, which would be more of a resource center and do research and provide tools for, especially for new charter operators. But the commission is interesting because it would allow applicants to apply directly to the commission, have their application approved, but then still be authorized by the district in which they're located. I'm just curious. I mean, it seems significant to me, but what are your thoughts into how important that is? And I should note, the budget didn't actually fund either of those this year, but the policy is in place. So if the legislature funds it next year, we should see those up and running. But just curious on your thoughts on those for charter school advocates.
So, Sarah?
Either one of you. If you want to go,
I'll go first. I don't have an Apple Watch because I can't deal with people seeing that, all the people calling me or texting me, and I don't work out, so that would just be a terrible reminder every day. So you had 2 bills. You had the Hawkins bill and the Rizzo bill. Fred's chair, or Representative Hawkins' bill, I think, was really trying to address some of the issues that we were seeing, at district levels in terms of reauthorization of charter schools. The issue with Representative Rizzo's bill and the charter commission, sort of this universal authorizer at the state level, and this was something that I pushed him on the floor and in committee, was really trying to understand what's the prevalence of this model elsewhere in the country. And the reality is that I'm going to get the number wrong, but it was I want to say north of 20 states have this alternate authorizer model where there's a state authorizer that can authorize charter schools. And I know that he worked to make sure in the bill there were ways for the school district to be engaged with those conversations. From that vantage point, I think it was really important, from my vantage point looking at it, was that you have sort of a consistency of in a system, right? That you have the same, not the same metrics, because I know that each school district is doing this, but you do have consistency in how these charter schools are being identified and where they're being placed across the state. And again, I always go back when we talk about issues around school choice. To me, people always ask me, are you pro charter school? Are you pro this? And it's like, no, I'm pro student, right? I've never said, it's only about charter schools. It's only about traditional public schools. It's only about vouchers. To me, it's the system working in conjunction that allows for students to have more opportunity. And I see it in, again, I use this example all the time. I see it in my community, in Miami-Dade County, fourth largest school district in the country, 350,000 students. 70% of our kids go to choice programs. Now, those kids aren't all in charter schools or in scholarship programs. But what has happened in Miami-Dade County is that the proliferation of choice has required our school district to really create so many innovative options that are available to our students. So whether it's a dual enrollment program or a magnet program, I think about one of those high schools in my district, South Miami Senior High, which has the preeminent broadcast journalism program in the county. A lot of this is the result of choice really being the focus of the school district and allowing students and families to decide what are the best options for them. So I think that was a major centerpiece for that bill. I don't remember, I'm trying to think back, and Bethany may remember, in 2021, I know there was another large bill that dealt with a lot of pieces for charter schools that ultimately didn't get across the finish line. But obviously, Senator Diaz's bill made it through this year.
Yeah, 7058 is a little different. In 2021, there was a bill, and it's been a topic of conversation of how can Florida have a statewide authorizer. What did pass in 2021 is allowing colleges to be authorizers as well as universities for charters. And you'll hopefully see at the May State Board meeting a rule that's going to formalize that process for that to happen. There was a part in policy that's come not only up last session, but in previous sessions of how do you have a statewide entity to approve charters in that sponsor level when you're right, Representative Aloupis, there's about 20 states or more that have them, including DC, that have their own statewide. And a lot of times it's the State Board of Education in the states. Sometimes it's an independent commission, but it's a functioning arm that allows those charters to become an educational option for students looking for that education in their community. And it's very pivotal, and it didn't get funded this year, but like you said, Sarah, it is in policy. So I know that will be something that gets continued in the conversations as we even look forward already to 2023 session of making sure Florida has a lot of different opportunities to expand those choices for students. And Representative Aloupis, I think you said it perfectly. It's pro-student of allowing them and their parents to figure out what's the best for them. When you look at the Miami-Dade College, the Florida Institute for Charter School Innovation, they had a lot of really great ideas of what they wanted to do to be a supporter of the state for not just the local Miami area, but across the state. And I'm sure that will continue in hopes that that can actually become a reality soon. But we're moving forward on at least implementing the policies that did pass last year, allowing colleges and universities to become authorizers. And one of the things we even did with some of the federal dollars for relief funding that came down is there's a couple colleges that they're looking forward to opening their first charters, and it's going to be specifically around career and adult education focus for high school. And it's going to be some of the first time that you'll see, one, these colleges authorize a charter, but also open it specifically for high school students that are looking to have more of that work-based learning opportunities that hopefully will get them to, graduate from their senior year with different certifications to have them enter the workforce, and as well as be on pathways to continue their education to get additional certifications to help them.
And one quick just note on the Charter School Review Commission, there is a difference between a statewide authorizer. So we have a lot of states where it is a statewide commission, or maybe it's a university that is authorized, they're approving the application, but they're also sponsoring the charter school, and they're overseeing compliance by the charter school. And that would not be the case here because of our constitutional requirement in Florida that district school boards oversee schools. So there is a difference there, and it's definitely interesting. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what happens once that is potentially, budgeted for, and we see what happens with that, as well as the additional authorizers, colleges and universities. So another issue that was discussed when it comes to school choice this year that ultimately ended very differently than earlier versions is virtual education. And Florida, as most of you know, I would say we've probably led the country in terms of virtual education, virtual options. Florida Virtual School has been around, I don't even know, a really long time. And there's Florida Virtual School Global. They've actually just been rebranded. I think it's called FlexPoint now, but they offer services and PD to school districts and states around the country. Every district in Florida is required to have a virtual option. And there was some discussion about the quality of virtual schools, whether some of those options are not good for kids. So Rep. Aloupis, I know that was not your bill, but I don't know if there's anything you want to offer on just maybe what some of those concerns were, and anything that ultimately passed. Just kind of maybe touch on that discussion a little bit.
So a couple of things. I think what COVID, if there's a silver lining of COVID, I think we realize, especially in the education spaces, we just realize the importance of brick and mortar schools, right? The need for face-to-face instruction. And I'm a fan of Florida Virtual Schools. I think there's a role for it to play in our public education system and as an option for parents. I think prior to COVID, I think people probably thought, and I would include myself in this, there are so many other options for, virtual school is going to be the next great thing. And I think what we saw from the pandemic is that, as I said earlier, in-person instruction is still has to be our focus. So, looking at it at the issue through that lens, I think for a lot of us in the legislature, we really started to question, what is the role of virtual education in our public education system? Now, Chair Fine, I sat on the PreK-12 Appropriations Subcommittee. One of the things Chair Fine is very good at is identifying an issue and then bringing it to light. And he talked about the fact that there were school districts that, in providing that virtual option to their students, were recruiting students from other districts to their virtual option. And I won't name the school district, but he used one school district in particular, which I believe at one point had more students or an equal number of students in its virtual school as it did in its brick and mortar schools. And 96% or 97% of those students were from outside the district. And you can understand it becomes very problematic when you have school districts trying to pull students from other districts, to use their virtual option. And I had a number of conversations with this about, with folks in the education space. And I think part of me I felt like if a school district was creating a proprietary system, right, that was singular, that was uniquely special, and that was something that they were going to do and provide to as many students as possible, then that's one, I guess that's one consideration. But the reality from what we saw and what was presented to our committee was that a lot of the school districts were basically taking FLVS, placing their own logos over it, and then offering it out to students. And it was really more marketing than anything else that was driving students to these programs. And I think what Chair Fine did was raise a really important question in terms of, should school districts be creating these virtual options and then actively recruiting students from other districts? And, that was sort of where I began to feel a level of concern. That it took the school district's eye off of the focus on their own students and rather on trying to sort of be entrepreneurial and recruit, more students from across the district, from outside the district. Again, only further complicated by the fact that I know that students can go to schools outside of their own district. But again, it was just we saw a number of examples where those virtual options, when 96% or 97% of the students in your virtual option are not in your district, then I think it speaks to a larger issue that we need to address.
So let me offer a different perspective. What if a parent says, there's a reason that 90% of those kids were from outside of the district. I think it was a pretty rural district in Central Florida. What if, isn't it their choice? If Florida has public school choice, which we do, and right now students can cross district lines to go to any public school of their choice if there is capacity. I think one of the things that ultimately did pass this year was putting some limits on the capacity as far as kids crossing lines into those. So, what do you say to someone who says, well, it's my choice. I can choose to go to a charter school. I can choose to go to, a school that takes vouchers or whatever. If I
think Sarah just got
you just
paused.
froze.
Are you back, Sarah?
frozen.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
And Sarah, I think where you're going with that question is maintaining school choice and allowing parents to pick where they go, right? And wherever that virtual provider is. And I just want to clarify one thing. There's Florida Virtual Schools. That is an entity that, yes, has been innovative and was well before its time and is nationally and actually globally known, right? We also have several other virtual instructor providers. We call them VIP providers in the state. They all have to be state approved by the Department of Education and meet different quality metrics to be able to become those providers in the state. So Florida Virtual is not the only option that students and parents have that option, to have that selection, right, to choose from. They can go to Florida Virtual directly and say, hey, I'm going to work with you, or they can go Florida Virtual franchises, similar to how you would franchise like a Chick-fil-A to districts. And I think that was a part of the discussion of should there be district franchises with Florida Virtual? And then on top of that, how do we also look at making sure in sense of having competition to, once a rising tide lifts all ships, allow there to be an equal playing field for other virtual instructor providers in the state and giving those options to parents. That's a whole part of the discussion that you probably have a lot of those experts on here to talk about. When it really comes down to allowing those choices to still be there, is I think what Representative Aloupis was talking about, like in person is really, we know the data shows it is the best. Compared to blended, compared to all full virtual, we know from COVID silver lining, butts and seats in front of teachers, that's going to get us the best student outcomes. And we're going to see that. And we've already seen it this last year. And I know we're going to continue to see it whenever NAEP comes back around. So we're looking forward, since Florida was the first in the nation to be able to have the students come back. But a part of the discussion that allowing that in the conforming bill that passed that had the virtual instruction changes was really about allowing those other authorizers not just to be functioning out of a district, but be statewide, which then opens up the discussion on funding. Because when you look at your FESP, part of the nuances is, there's $26 billion, $13 billion coming from the state, but you have that $10 billion that's coming locally. So how do you make sure that we have funding for the students at appropriate levels, based off of how the funding will go towards those students where they live and where they're getting educated? And there's not some ripple effects that are negative because we want to be able to have those choice options of where students want to go, whether it's in X county or Z county across the state.
And Sarah, I would say this, and this was again, I had a number of conversations about this as soon as our committee began addressing this issue. From my vantage point, if a school district, as I said, if a school district was creating a proprietary system that was unique in and of itself, like they had an incredible option that was not FLVS with their logo on it, then that to me is a different issue. And then I think there's a policy conversation of like, should a school district be spending its time and resources on creating that unique virtual option? Maybe. But to me, you can still provide choice to families by putting all of these options at the statewide level with a drop down. So say, I want to go to FLVS, I want to go to K-12 Stride, I want to go to, name your virtual option that can come from the department that doesn't require school districts to, basically take a model that already exists, put their logo on it, and then go out and recruit students from other districts. And I think that was where our concern was. If any of these counties had created a truly singular program that was a new option to families, absolutely. But I think where we went wrong, and this is a policy discussion that went back a number of years, where school districts were providing essentially the same option, but with just a different logo on it. That's not really choice, right? It's just like I have a choice of going to this FLVS option that has a Miami-Dade logo, or this one that has a Broward County logo. That's not choice. So I think for us, looking at it and saying, okay, how do we continue to provide choice options to families, which I think you can do, but also not getting into a situation where, I think what we saw this year, which is school districts actively trying to recruit students from outside their district for something that isn't, that is being offered at the state level. Really complicated issue, but something that I think, I'm grateful that it was at least addressed, because I think, like anything in Tallahassee, there were so many issues. I think, the COVID sort of drove us to a place where we saw, like, okay, this is something we need to figure out. And, Chair Fine really put light on it. And I think a lot of the questions that you asked have to be answered as we move forward.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy topic. And I think I'm sure around the country, we're going to continue to deal with that, the issue of virtual, just because of COVID, because so many more students are learning in a virtual platform. So I'm going to give you guys one more question each, and then we're going to go to audience Q&A. So Representative Aloupis, I don't remember if you said this in your intro, but you just announced a week or so ago that you are not seeking re-election. So after November, you're no longer going to be representative. You mentioned you have been the chair of the Early Learning and Elementary Subcommittee in the House for the past 2 years. And from my memory, I don't remember the House or Senate ever having a committee or subcommittee with the term early learning in the title. So I think, that right there shows that we have made early learning a much bigger priority. But I would love to know, just quickly, and it may be some of the stuff you touched on, what's your biggest accomplishment and what are you most proud of as you leave the legislature in November? What are your biggest accomplishments?
Yeah, I know a bunch of the folks in the waiting room, and Sarah, you and I have talked about this. I think for me, like the last 12 years of my life have really been fighting for, children and families. And I think sometimes we do that to the detriment of our own children and our own families. And I think for me, I live in Miami-Dade. We're not close to Tallahassee. We spend a lot of time there. And I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And, just to be personal with everyone for a minute, like this session, I got to the point where I was reading to my 3-year-old at night, and we're reading a book, and there's no dad and there's no father figure in the book. And she said, "Where's the dad?" And I'm flipping through trying to find him. And I said, "Oh, he's not here, sweetie." And she goes, "Well, is he in Tallahassee?" And I think for all of us, we have to, you always have to you have to center yourself and say, is this where I need to be right now? And I feel so blessed that I got to serve the last 4 years and do what I actually said I was going to Tallahassee to do, which was really singularly to draw attention to these issues. Now my responsibility is to be there for my 3 little girls as they go through these. I have a 10-year-old who's going on 30, so I have to make sure I'm there to keep any of the boys out of the house. But I would say this, like as somebody who, like 5 years ago, try to get meetings with legislators and had to sit and talk to their aides about early childhood and get sort of patronized, to go from that to like literally 3.5, 4 years later being the chair of the Early Learning and Elementary Education Subcommittee is something that I couldn't have even hoped for in my wildest dreams. It's a testament to just the leadership in the House, of Speaker Sprowls, of the work that we've done, that Aaron Grawl has done, that so many have done to elevate this issue. And my hope is that, and I've had a number of conversations with Speaker-designate Renner, who truly understands, the issue of prosperity for all Floridians, and that early childhood education is fundamentally tied to that. I hope that that early learning doesn't take a backseat to the larger K-12 conversation, because I don't think you can have a meaningful conversation about K-12 education without having a serious conversation about early learning. They're too interconnected. They're too interwoven. There's too much on the line. So I hope that is what we see in the moving forward, that there'll continue to be that space for early learning conversations. Two final points. What I'm most proud of is obviously the policies that we passed in the last 2 years are the most transformation we've had in 20 years. It's nothing like I always felt like I was nibbling around the edges or working around in the margins. And like in the last 2 years, to see this issue elevated and to see the transformational policy tells me like we did something really, really good. The non-policy success is that I have a number of colleagues who are going to be there next year who have caught in the bug and cared deeply about this issue and understand it. So I think of Representative Hawkins and Trabolsi and Koster and Hunchofsky and so many people who understand this, who I know are going to carry on that legacy. Moving forward from a policy standpoint, I think, we're going to continue to have to make sure that 419, that was the right, everything we did there, that, I'm sure there's going to be areas to tweak. I think the big question is going to be around funding, right? Like, we still have a major challenge in our early childhood teacher shortage. So like, we talk about teacher salaries in K-12, $47,500 for a starting teacher, but no one ever talks about the fact that the early childhood teacher is making $12 an hour, right? And we're in an economy now where it makes significantly more interest to go work at Chick-fil-A for $17 an hour than it does to work in a child care center. So how do you get to a place where you're recruiting great talent, you're giving them a path to professional development, you're creating a space for the growth in their career? Because at the end of the day, that's going to be the most important element to the success of these programs. And it's a really difficult issue, only exacerbated by the nature of our economy right now. So a lot of that's going to be dictated by funding. A lot of that's going to be dictated by lowering the barriers for people to enter the industry. And I don't say that from a quality standpoint. I'm just saying, like, things like right now we require people to pay for their own background checks, right? Like, if you're making $12 an hour, why are we charging you? Why are we making you do that? Why isn't the center or the state picking up that tab? So there's all these little things I think we can do to create the path into the profession easier. But those are the big questions I think we have moving forward, which are, how do we make sure the workforce continues to grow? How do we make sure that, and I'll stop after this because I know we're running out of time. Like, on the child care subsidy piece, how do we make sure that we're not in a place where parents are having to decide whether or not they take a $1 an hour promotion without losing that child care subsidy? Right? Because right now you're seeing situations where there are fiscal cliffs where, a single mother who's making $11 an hour or $10 an hour might make that $1 an hour more, but because she makes $1 an hour more, she's no longer eligible for school readiness, and she loses basically a $6,000 voucher for her child to be in childcare. We shouldn't be putting people in those predicaments. So I think a lot of those issues can be fleshed out through the legislature moving forward. But I'm excited because we're no longer like an afterthought. It's an issue that people care about, they understand. And I think that moving forward, you're going to see, the governor talks about it, the Senate president, the House Speaker talks about it. I think it's going to be something that, continues to be a centerpiece for legislatures to come.
Good answer. Okay, last question is for Bethany. So
I don't know if I want to follow that up. That was beautiful.
You're the chief of staff for, probably one of the largest departments of education in the country. Florida's the third largest state. We're innovative in a lot of ways, but perhaps not in others. I'm just curious, you go to national conferences, and I'm sure you have colleagues that you talk to around the country. What do you think? And I know education's not your background, but you have been knee deep in these policies and this stuff for years now. What do you think Florida's doing right? And what do you think, other states are doing better that we could learn from?
Oh, that's a great one. Florida's doing a lot of things right. Representative Aloupis, you talked about being at the most transformative time in education. We have a board. We have a picture of a whiteboard, actually, that had all of these policy ideas from 2019, and it was all buckets of what are we going to do for teachers? What are we going to do for choice? What are we going to do for school safety? What are we going to do when it comes to early learning? And one of the things we kind of laugh about and have a lot of pride in is that whole board is crossed off with markers, because in the last really 4 years, the last 4 sessions, there has been the most transformative policy from everything from early learning all the way to workforce that Florida, we have coined ourselves the education state, and we have a legislature and a governor that supports it and understands the importance of it. The whole reason why I'm so passionate about it is because it truly does. If you get it right from early learning, if you get that kid into a good BPK quality and they're ready for kindergarten, they're set for life. Achievement gap closed. Doesn't matter what zip code they're from, doesn't matter what color their skin is, it doesn't matter at all. That kid is on a path for success, and not just for finding a great job, but making a truly good citizen. I know one of the things we've always said, and I've heard too, go to school, get a good job, give back to the community, there you go. And one of the most important things that have been impactful for me as a people that I get to work with every day, that we truly, I get to see them breathe and discuss it and talk about it, just like Representative Aloupis. It's not just about getting every single individual a great job. It's about setting everybody up for a great life. And that in itself, if that doesn't inspire you to be a part of that, then I don't know what would inspire you. And Florida definitely has the bug of understanding and wanting to get it right. I think early learning, there's been a lot of great policies, but it's going to be implementation, and it's going to have patience to see those things and those fruits come. Similar to literacy and reading. In 2017, before I even stepped foot in this department and worked in education, there was a lot of transformative literacy policies that had been put forward by the legislature. And we're just now starting to see those fruits of that labor with COVID too, right? Which put everybody a little bit farther back. So moving forward for us, it's going to be making sure we take these visions that have been put into law and make them realities that work and work for the betterment of every single person, and understanding our state is truly 4 states in a country. So really 5 different entities, and Miami's its own country, I always like to say, and we see that in our districts and our landscape. And when it comes to school choice, yeah, we're a leader, but that also then means we need to take time to help pay it forward to other states. So I know our agency's even working. Texas has come and asked us a couple things about our different scholarships and how that's worked. So we're helping them. On the other side, 1507 passed last year. It was a big workforce bill. There were a lot of great policies everywhere from, I think, like West Virginia, Tennessee, and a couple other states that they had wonderful policies that they were doing really impactful things. And I know you'll probably talk more about this type of policy in your higher ed panel that you have tomorrow. But we have things to learn from them. And I think that just takes the time for having those opportunities to have the discussions and conversations and open the doors to that. I don't know if that answers your question, really. I feel like I just rambled. But I wanna...
No, you did.
Sarah, I know we only have 2 minutes. Yeah. Can I say one quick thing that I just want to make sure we underscore is that I've been really proud of Speaker Sproul's focus on literacy, and not just in like a generic sense of like reading is important and, you know, 3rd grade. Like he actually, again, as somebody who's been around the block for the last decade in Tallahassee looking at these issues, I really think what he did in all of the packages that were put together, whether it was, you know, the New World's Reading Initiative or HB 7011, like all of these bills, they tackle literacy from multiple directions. So you looked at it from, you know, building the home library with New World Reading, to creating the RAISE program to inject, you know, additional resources into schools that have struggling readers, to the progress monitoring tool so teachers can identify early where a child is struggling. And I think for so long we sort of just we accepted the fact that, you know, in Florida, you know, I'm being somewhat generic here, but like, you know, 40% of kids are not going to be ready for kindergarten. 40% are not going to be reading at proficiency in 3rd grade, and 40% aren't going to be reading at grade level in 10th grade. So you've got this direct line. And I think what Speaker Sprouse did is said, like, if we don't tackle this issue, then Florida is going to have serious challenges moving forward. And it can't be just lip service. It can't be, you know, just a book program, it has to be multi-pronged. And I think that's one of the things that hasn't been really celebrated. And those of us in the education space are really excited about it, because he really helped, you know, the House really tackled it from all these different angles to make sure that we have all the pieces we need to address those issues.
Totally agree. Well, y'all did such a great job. We actually ran out of time for Q&A, but we had a couple of good audience questions. And what I'm going to do is see if we can answer those. We did get a shout out to Vance and Bethany and a thank you in our questions. So y'all were awesome. For a couple of those questions that the audience asked, we will try to get you the answers to those. We also are going to be sending out an education update from Florida, just kind of an overview of some of the major bills. So if we didn't touch on them today, anyone who registered for the webinar will get that. And just a quick plug, if you are interested in higher education, we're going to also do a webinar tomorrow at the same time to talk about some of those higher ed and workforce issues. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Representative Aloupis. Thank you, Bethany. I appreciate everyone being on here. We will talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.